Hey there, friends, and welcome back to Another Look. Another Look is a chance for us to take a look ahead at some of the readings coming up so you can dig in a little bit prior to Sunday morning. I'm Pastor Derek, so let's take a look at what's coming up this week. This week, we're going to be finishing up our sermon series on real life religion. And we've talked about the word religion and how that doesn't really seem to fit right, but it's the word that was alliterative and it worked. So, real life religion is really driving us to understand how we live our lives as Christians in the world. And our three basic readings for this weekend, the epistle reading, the second reading, the one we're going to talk about on Sunday morning, is the reading from Romans chapter 12. And it really drives us to this idea of not casting judgment on people who are new to the faith because they don't understand. I think so often in our lives, we make it so challenging for people to come into the church and to get to know the gospel because we make them look a certain way and act a certain way. And I think Romans 14 speaks against that a little bit. It tells us that we might have some of our priorities in the wrong places. We'll talk about that on Sunday. But in our time together today, I want to take a look at our Old Testament reading. That's from the first few books of the Bible, right? The first half of the Bible, we have books all about before Jesus. And so Genesis chapter 50 is our Old Testament reading for this week. It's chapter 50, beginning in verse 15. This is when Joseph is sold into slavery, the coat of many colors, that whole deal, right? So Joseph is sold into slavery and his brothers are jealous, right? So they sell him into slavery and he comes into Pharaoh's house and he's made essentially the second man in charge of everything in Pharaoh's house. Now, this is a pretty cool story that happens, and there's a lot that happens that we're not going to talk about. But in Genesis chapter 50, here beginning in verse 15, so Joseph's father has died and his brothers are terrified that Joseph is going to have them killed because he didn't get to spend more time with his dad. That's kind of the crux of the story. And Joseph says something in here that's pretty spectacular. He references this idea that what you intended for evil, God intended for good. That's a pretty powerful thought. Joseph is able to see beyond the challenge, the disruption in his life, the being sold into slavery, accused of being a criminal, all those things. Joseph looks at that and says, you tried to hurt me, but I can't be upset. I can't be upset because what you tried to do to hurt me, God actually was going to use for my benefit, for your benefit, for the benefit of the whole nation. And while he's still sad that his dad is gone, while he's still sad that he didn't get to spend more time with his father, he understands that God had a purpose in all of it, and he was going to rejoice in the middle of it. Not rejoice because his dad was dead by any means, but rather rejoice that God was able to do something huge, spectacular, amazing, and miraculous in his life and in the lives of all of the people of Israel because he was able to be sold into slavery. Now, I know that's kind of weird, but that was Joseph's focus. And I think if we were to kind of have a different outlook on life, if we were to approach life from a God is sovereign perspective, we probably would be able to see similar things happen as well. Okay, so our second reading is from Matthew chapter 18. Matthew chapter 18 is this parable of the unforgiving servant. So it's the parable goes something like this, right? So this man had a huge debt, and when he went to go pay this debt, and I don't mean just a few $100s kind of a debt. I'm talking this ridiculous, you can't even count that high kind of debt. The debt that he owed would have been more than probably the entire nation would have been worth, which is what makes this kind of so outrageous. So this man has this huge debt. And when he goes up to the king to have his debt collected, he doesn't have the money to pay, and so he pleads for the mercy of the king. Give me another chance, he says. Let me work it off. I want to make it right. And the king forgives the debt. Not only does he hold the payment off, he doesn't just say, you know what, you've got extra time. He actually says, I'm going to get rid of your debt altogether. It's no longer going to be counted against you. And this man is ecstatic. He's overjoyed. He leaves. He's got a smile on his face. He's going to go tell his family. But then he goes and he meets another guy on the street. And this other guy on the street owes him a significantly smaller amount of money. Not insignificant, but significantly smaller. And this man who just had this massive debt forgiven turns around and he has this other guy beaten and thrown in prison and his entire family. And it's just this awful thing. And he says, until you can pay me back all this debt, I'm not gonna let up. I'm gonna keep the pressure on you. Now, that doesn't seem super fair. And I think that's the point. The point Jesus is driving us to understand here, it goes beyond the dollar debt. Okay, so as the story wraps up, I'll get to the point here in a second. The story wraps up, the king hears about it and has the man thrown into prison. The original man whose debt was forgiven, the big debt, he has him thrown back into prison because he calls him wicked and unmerciful and unforgiving and all those things. Now, I think the problem is that the point to all this that Jesus is trying to help us understand is that we, a lot of times, in our day-to-day relationships and in our reactions with people, we're kind of like that unforgiving servant, the man with a huge debt. He didn't realize how big his debt was. And he didn't even understand how much it meant that he was forgiven. He was thankful in the moment, but it never really sunk in. And he turned around and he was mean, unforgiving to the people around him. How often are we the same way? We don't understand the weight and the gravity and the penalty for our sin, and yet we hold others accountable for sins that they have done. We love the fact that Jesus forgave us. We love the fact that he came and died on the cross to forgive us, but we don't value the forgiveness that he offered. And so we don't pay it forward to other people. If we were to kind of put these two readings together, the unmerciful servant and Joseph with his brothers, we start to realize that sometimes God allows us to be in situations where we're around people who aren't always going to treat us rightly. And that doesn't mean that they're evil people or that they don't need his forgiveness, but rather it might just be a way for us to recognize the forgiveness we've been given, so that we can pay that same forgiveness forward to the people around us. I hope that gives you a quick glimpse into what these texts are about. And until we come back together again next time for another look, make it a great weekend and be well, friends.